With Aion 2 now scheduled for a global release in Q3 of 2026, people are starting to ask the same questions. What kind of a game is it actually going to be once it reaches the West? And most importantly, will it be worth your time? I've been playing Aion 2 daily since the game's release in Taiwan and Korea at the end of last year, leveling multiple classes, clearing all of the available content, and seeing how the game has evolved since then. As it's usually the case with MMOs, the first few weeks don't really tell you much about whether the game systems and gameplay loop can actually hold up. The real test begins later once the initial excitement settles down and the rose-tinted glasses start to lose their power. That's why in today's video we are going to see how Aion 2 has actually held up after 3 months of active play and take a closer look at the core systems, the changes to gear progression in PvP, what still needs to change before the global release, and whether the pay to win is actually as bad as people fear. Let's dive in. One of the biggest problems with new MMO releases are the infamous content droughts. Nowadays, players consume content much quicker than before because most MMO systems these days are, let's face it, quite similar. And the player's mentality has shifted from simply enjoying a game to playing it with optimal efficiency. 3 months in, the main concern many players had was whether Aion 2's PvE content would actually hold up once the initial character progression rush slowed down. Aion 2 offers a bit of everything for everyone with, I'd say, different levels of success. It is a PvPvE game, but its core focus leans heavily towards PvE. The game features both group and solo dungeons, as well as an 8-man raid, with gear being primarily obtained from conquest dungeons, which come in normal and hard difficulties. The hard versions introduce additional mechanics and offer players higher chances of obtaining rare equipment. Some dungeons, such as Ascension Trials and Dredgen, for example, also rotate their map layouts weekly, helping the grind feel slightly less repetitive over time. Currently, if players are looking for a more challenging experience, the 8-man raid offers 3 boss encounters, with the final boss Ludra featuring mechanics you would expect from a proper raid experience. That being said, NCSoft is already planning to change their dungeon design approach due to complaints that the content lacks meaningful challenge, with planned changes focusing on increased base difficulty across all dungeons and adding more meaningful rewards. To address long-term grind concerns, NCSoft introduced several quality of life improvements early on. Dungeons come with PT mechanics, allowing players to choose from a selection of unique grade gear after a certain number of runs, and later they also added weapon change vouchers, in addition to the PT rewards, that allow players to exchange a weapon drop for a different class for something their class can actually use. Outside of dungeon farming, the game offers a wide range of activities such as abyss farming in PvP, arenas, battlegrounds, collecting and leveling pets, mini-games, crafting, gathering, world bosses, and tons of daily activities, all of which fit into character progression in one way or another. This is where some of the early friction between progression and long-term grind started to become quite noticeable. The pet system is one example of such friction. The way it works is fairly straightforward. By killing certain mobs, you collect their soul fragments, and once you gather enough of them, you unlock that mob as a pet, which also acts as your mount. From there, you continue collecting additional souls to level the pet up. Owning a pet grants your character additional stats like crit or accuracy, and while the individual bonuses are minor, they begin to add up once you start collecting multiple pets. Once a pet reaches max level, continuing to kill the same type of mobs rewards you with additional crystals, which are then fed into the genus system for, yes, you've guessed it, more stats. It's where a large proportion of the pet farming grind is primarily focused on. The original system was extremely grind heavy, and as you can imagine, the player base wasn't particularly happy about it. So the Aion 2 developers significantly reduced the number of souls required to level up pets, added a daily dungeon that rewards pet souls, and made pets shared across characters on the same server. This removed the need to farm the same pets all over again on outs, and actually allowed players to use their outs to speed up pet farming through daily dungeons. Overall, I'd say Aion 2 launched with a large amount of content, and there isn't a single activity in the game that doesn't reward you with items or resources that contribute directly to progression, giving most content a clear purpose within the gameplay loop. However, progression systems weren't the only thing affecting the overall experience during the first few months. I would be dishonest if I didn't at least acknowledge the ongoing issues with bots, as the game has quite frankly been heavily affected by them since release. NCSoft has taken multiple steps to address the problem, claiming a significant reduction in bot activity over time, with well over 200,000 bot accounts removed since launch. Additional systems have also been implemented to reduce the effectiveness of botting, including a capture system which, if failed, turns bots into what can only be described as venom-looking Pokemons. In their most recent developer livestream, the team stated that the overall bot population has now been reduced to less than 5% of the total player base, with further measures currently being implemented and planned for the future to continue limiting their impact. I really hope that the team responsible for the Western localization of Aion 2 treats botting as a serious issue and takes proactive measures against it, especially given how heavily the game's economy can be influenced by it. Where things become more divisive, however, is not the amount of content or bots Aion 2 has, but how the current monetization model of the game actually impacts your gear progression. I've been playing Aion 2 almost daily for the past 3 months, leveling multiple classes, pushing close to 3200 gear score on my main character, and clearing all of the content the game has to offer. I managed to do all of this without spending money beyond the subscription required for the players to access the in-game marketplace. When NCSoft first revealed Aion 2's monetization model for its Asian regions, many players were understandably skeptical. 2 subscriptions, multiple battle passes, and a currency exchange system are not things us Western players typically respond well to. After playing the game actively, I can safely say that the subscriptions and battle passes themselves are not really the main issue when it comes to the game's present state of pay to win. The real issue lies in the currency exchange system, where players can exchange the game's premium currency Kuna directly for in-game gold, Kina, and vice versa. Pretty much everything in Aion 2 revolves around Kina. Crafting, enchanting, engraving, and stats rerolling all require large amounts of it, making the in-game currency the primary bottleneck for character progression. As a result, we also are able to bypass the majority of the game's current time-gated systems. This becomes most noticeable in crafting, which is the main source of best-in-slot PvE gear. Crafted gear currently provides additional PvE damage bonuses on top of top-tier base stats, making it significantly stronger in endgame content compared to dungeon drops, which honestly feel more like something you use to boost your overall gear score, and without the correct stats, let's face it, that's just empty numbers. NCSoft has stated they do not want dungeon gear to compete directly with crafted gear in order to keep crafting relevant. That said, I seriously think that dungeon gear should benefit from at least small PvE damage bonuses. For example, if a crafted accessory provides a 2.5% PvE damage increase, the dungeon accessories could offer something like 1%, allowing dungeon drops to feel more relevant while still preserving crafting as the stronger gear option. When it comes to the actual systems involved in gear progression, Aion 2 feels a lot like a mix between Throne and Liberty and Aion 1. When you craft or loot an item, it comes with random stats. If you get something useless like mana or HP regeneration, you can reroll those stats using special items or by sacrificing other pieces of gear. In simple terms, you keep feeding gear into your item until it rolls something usable, which is without a shadow of a doubt one of the most frustrating systems in the game. The main issue with the system is that rerolling can give you the exact same stat you were trying to change. Some players end up spending dozens of unique items just to obtain one of their desired stats. I have quite a few items actually, chat, we can use to reroll. What are the odds of me getting combat speed? I just need combat speed. Just combat speed. And I get mana Aristiga. I'm gonna roll 5 times. Ask and you shall receive. On top of that, gear can be enchanted further by socketing mana stones, which again roll random stats, creating an RNG loop where progression is heavily tied to repeated rerolling. For players familiar with Korean MMOs, this is nothing new, but for others it quickly becomes a serious concern. Luckily, there are some good news. Special reroll items were introduced through the Substance Morph menu, giving players an alternative way to reroll stats on their gear without having to sacrifice other pieces of equipment, which somewhat helped to reduce some of the pressure around progression. To reduce this frustration further, NCSoft introduced a stat transfer system that allows players to transfer all stat rows from one item to another instead of starting from scratch. And with the most recent patch, they removed the 10 million Kina cost from transferring stats entirely, making the systems completely free and far far more accessible for players trying to keep up. But honestly, considering how similar this system already is to Tron Liberty's gear trades, a natural next step would be introducing something like a Soulbind and Lockstone through the Substance Morph menu, obtained by sacrificing a fixed number of gear pieces, which would then allow players to choose the exact stats they wanted on their gear. Now, what I'd consider to be another issue is the sheer amounts of stats in the game. Opening the character window for the first time can feel overwhelming, especially as many stats apply differently in PvE and PvP. At the same time, almost every activity contributes towards incremental power increases through collections, pets, wings, crafting, and achievements. This creates a consistent sense of progression, but also introduces a large amount of RNG, which can occasionally become quite frustrating. Some PT systems already exist, allowing players to trade additional resources for guaranteed item morphs, but this is clearly an area where further iteration would improve the overall player experience. So, with all of that in mind, in its current state, the game's monetization revolves less around subscriptions or battle passes and more around the interaction between the currency exchange system and RNG-driven progression. The pay-to-win aspect in Aion 2 therefore fits in the pay-to-skip or pay-to-progress faster category, as players are not purchasing exclusive power that cannot be obtained through gameplay. I will leave it up to you to decide what that means, since everyone tends to have a different definition of pay-to-win. Just keep in mind that MMOs are a marathon, not a race. This brings us to the next question of whether free-to-play players can realistically keep up. Hi there. Before we move on, a quick word from today's sponsor, LagoFast. Over the past few months, while playing Aion 2 on overseas servers, I've been using LagoFast quite regularly. One of the main reasons is simply connection stability. It lets you switch between dedicated server nodes with a single click, which helps reduce latency and can fix issues like random disconnects, especially when you're playing outside your region. It also comes with a built-in DPS tool, which I found genuinely useful while testing different builds and rotations. It gives you a full breakdown of your skills and damage contribution, so if you're trying to optimize your rotation or understand where your damage is actually coming from, it makes that process much easier. On top of that, it also includes a game repair tool that can help resolve common issues like crashes, spell updates, or problems with game downloads, which is something a few players have already run into while playing Aion 2. If you want to check it out, I'll leave a link in the description below, and you can also use my code ASELON for a 30% discount. And with that said, let's get back to the video. If you want to stay competitive as a free-to-play player, you will inevitably have to make a few outs, as they can meaningfully speed up your progression. Unlike other MMOs, however, outs in Aion 2 don't require a huge amount of time investment to become effective, and even outs in basic starter gear can generate meaningful resources for your main character. To prevent outing from causing burnout, as most MMO players are not particularly fond of having to use outs to progress their main characters, several measures have already been introduced to reduce reliance on outs by adding alternative resource sources, including increasing dungeon drops and making crafting materials easier to obtain. That being said, it's not impossible to catch up or keep up, though at times the climb as a free-to-play player can be steep, and further adjustments will definitely be required to keep the game as fair as possible. We still don't know what the monetization will look like for Aion 2 for its global version, but based on how NCSoft handled the localization of games like Blade and Soul, Aion 1 and Tron and Liberty, my personal expectation is that it probably won't be too different from what we see now. Realistically, changes could include merging the two subscriptions into a single one with adjusted pricing, making battle passes purchasable directly with Kina instead of making players convert it into Kuna first, and potentially introducing a weekly limit of how much Kuna can be exchanged for Kina. If they decide to keep most of the current business model the same, the most realistic solution would be introducing more PT systems or catch-up mechanics to prevent the gear progression gap from widening as patches age. But this would need to be handled carefully to avoid making progression feel meaningless. Up until now, most of our discussion has been around PvE and progression systems, but PvP is where players' expectations were historically much higher. Aion 1 was originally known for its PvP, so old-timers like me were quite curious to see how Aion 2 would live up to the original's legacy. While NCSoft has stated that the game's primary focus is PvE, there is still a considerable amount of PvP content available through arenas, battlegrounds, the Abyss, and rifting. Early on, PvP suffered massively massively from class balance issues and extremely low time to kill, with fights often ending in seconds, leaving very little for actual counterplay. NCSoft has since adjusted how stats are scaled in PvP, increased defensive values, and made skill adjustments across multiple classes. These changes helped increase time to kill and made encounters feel noticeably better, though class balance is still very much a work in progress. Because most PvP takes place in the Abyss, which favors flight combat, ranged classes still hold an advantage over melee classes. Rifting, which is essentially Aion 2's open world PvP mode, also saw early changes after players grew frustrated with dungeon entrances being camped. The introduction of a flag-based systems helped reduce frustration for casual players, but it also lowered the incentive for open world PvP compared to the original Aion systems. NCSoft tried to increase the incentive for people to flag for PvP by introducing medals as rewards to kill achievements, but either players didn't get the memo or it's not a good enough incentive for people to flag for PvP, so rifting is still something they really need to look into if they want to keep the game mode active. What I consider to be quite an important change was reducing both the duration and effectiveness of teal stones in PvP, as their high proc rate, partially due to the fast-paced nature of the combat, made player encounters feel rather boring and unfair, to put it mildly. For those of you who don't know what teal stones are, they're special items you can infuse into your weapons to gain additional effects such as elemental damage or crowd control such as root, slow, paralysis, and so on. Passive abilities across all classes have also been adjusted to include higher crowd control resistance and additional defensive bonuses, helping to increase time to kill even further. An issue I think worth mentioning is the render distance, which still requires adjustments. In certain areas, mobs and players appear abruptly even with the view distance setting set to max. While this may have been implemented to support optimization in large-scale encounters, which are still laggy by the way, NCSoft, please take notes, it remains an area that clearly needs more work. Another fair point of criticism remains the current UI, which makes tracking buffs, debuffs, and identifying enemy classes unnecessarily difficult. It also makes what is essentially a pretty decent game look rather cheap. Overall, I do believe the recent PvP changes are a step in the right direction, but considering Aion 2's PvE focus, it may take some time until the PvP experience fully settles into something we can all collectively agree as enjoyable. As we wait for Aion 2 to release globally in Q3 of 2026, what's the final verdict? Is it going to be worth your time? Despite its current monetization shortcomings, if you're a fan of MMOs, Aion 2 is definitely a game worth keeping an eye on. The MMO landscape right now is relatively dry, and based on the direction the game has taken over the past few months, Aion 2 feels like a game we could sink our teeth into for quite some time. The game delivers strong visuals, an excellent soundtrack, a combat system that feels fast and impactful, as well as a large amount of content that for the most part feels rewarding. Is it going to be a genre redefining experience? No, not really, but it could shift people's perception of mobile and PC cross-platform MMOs in a more positive direction, as this is arguably the best PC and mobile cross-platform MMO currently on the market, especially when you look at how many others like Tarisland or Valhalla Rising tried and ultimately failed. That said, the game is not without its issues. Monetization, progression systems, and class balance still require further iteration. Performance optimization is also an ongoing issue, particularly in large-scale PvP encounters where limited render distance and the current UI can negatively affect the gameplay experience. So far, NCSoft has acknowledged these problems and promised improvements, but for now we are still waiting to see those changes materialize. At the end of the day, Aion 2 may not have everything figured out yet, but after 3 months, it still feels like a game moving in the right direction rather than one already losing momentum. So, what do you think? Are you going to try Aion 2 when it releases in the West? And also, what changes do you think the game still needs? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching. If you found this video useful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot. I'm also streaming Aion 2 almost daily on Twitch, so don't be shy. Come and say hi. Anyhow, I'll see you in the next one.